Okay, everybody, you can stop the cackle in the background. Peter? Okay. Now, the thing is this. We haven't got much time, so we'll just be dealing with a few elements and and I've got a number of interesting charts who I'm not, the identity of which I'm not disclosing immediately. Now, life force. Where do you expect to find life force in the chart? Well, it's the Sun, and it's the Sun and Mars are the lively forces. And in this particular chart, we have a fourth house Sun in Capricorn, and we have a second house Sun at Mars in Scorpio. Now, there is a trine from the Mars to Jupiter, and there is, where's the Sun got? The Sun has a sextile to Mars and a sextile to Jupiter. Now, in the beginning, in this chart, how does this entity, how does this life force start off at its day, or any particular, what is the manner of beginning? Where is the beginning? Beginning is in the ascendant. So the necessity for beginning employs what? What with Libra on the ascendant, what is demanded? Yes, well, and Saturn in the 12th? Well, this gentleman got out of bed very, very effectively all his life. Now, it demands an act of judgment, an act of collaboration. It demands that you have choice. Wherever Libra appears in the chart, choice is involved. And if this person does not begin with choice, that is, if he only has one element in vision and does not bring in another element, then the beginning is difficult. Yeah. And what happens immediately after the choice is made? What comes next? Peter, you go. Well, what happens with when Uranus is first after the ascendant? No, there's Uranus, which is the Sun and Mars. That's the European symbol for Uranus, and it is the active will. The individual will is Uranus is a fusion of the Sun and Mars in terms of will. So I think that symbol describes it a lot more effectively than the conventional one. So immediately a choice is made, the individual will comes in to alter it, doesn't it? And from there, and there is a contact between the Uranus and the Neptune-Pluto conjunction up there in the 8th cusp of the 9th. Now, you can when I said in that can you exist in your present form, or is suicide necessary? It's just a provocative statement. It's a provocative statement, but I want you to think about what the functions of the outer planets actually are in any given moment. They're entirely subconscious, and they all effect change. Now, for example, in this, if you start off with a thought, for example, if this map represents the beginning of a thought process for this gentleman, in which the status quo and the established order of things is there at the beginning because Saturn is conjunct the ascendant, and there is an element of choice and judgment involved in that as to whether it is appropriate or not, there comes a stage at which if the implications of the thought are to be followed and truly investigated, one's previous assumptions, all that Saturnian structure with which one started off, which is there hanging always in the background, has to be let go of. It has to die. You've got to sort of push it over the edge of the cliff if you are to allow the implications to really take hold and alter your understanding. And it is the function of the outer planets, and particularly of Pluto, to affect that change of understanding, and particularly with Pluto. So here, with all the activity that goes on in the subconscious because of here are all these planets below the horizon. We've got a Uranus, Mars in Scorpio, all second house stuff really. Uranus is pretty well towards the end of the first house, and certainly in the sign that dominates the second, the cusp of the second. Here there is a status quo started off with. And immediately that is considered, it's altered and changed by the function of Uranus. And the Mars, the action, the life force takes place then in deciding, what is important for me? What is the position that I have at this, what value or meaning do I attach to this immediate circumstance? And to attach himself to it automatically involves a change. To be attached is to alter it, the Scorpio on the cusp of the second. And then there's all kinds of considerations, but look at the trine from Mars to Jupiter. In the alteration and the attachment is already a bypass from functions which still need to take place down through the rest of the houses to the sixth, with Jupiter in the sixth. So his whole intuitive sense. Why do I say intuitive sense? Anyone? Jupiter. The Jupiter. Jupiter, why is Jupiter beneficial? It's because it involves the function of the intuition, which is the function which enables you to see something as a whole. When you can see something as a whole, you can go straight into it. Saturn just shows you the little bit in front of you at the moment. So there is, as soon as he makes an active attachment to something of personal value in the second, which comes straightway, immediately after the whatever static, he might well lie in bed a long time thinking about, but bed is a marvelous place to do thinking, talking, all sorts of things, contemplating, but there is, with the Saturn on the ascendant, a need to consider a whole lot of factors, because what happens with Saturn, when Saturn transits a personal planet in your chart, or almost any planet, a particular personal planet, what is the predominant mode of being that you've experienced? Thought. In my experience, Saturn is concerned primarily with the thinking process. When you're thinking, you can't act. You have to get through the cycle of thinking, of thought, before you can act. That is why Saturn delays. Now, Saturn also, when we're talking about this in this particular chart, is concerned. Saturn is earth and form. So if you want to turn thought into form, what do? Well, you write. The written word is a Saturnian symbol. And if you want to get out of, if you, for example, have a Saturn-Mercury contact in the chart, what is Saturn contact? It's got a square to Mercury. It's got a square to Mercury in this chart. So if you want to get out of that continual cycle of thought, what do? You write down all the options and all the thoughts that you have, and then you can make a choice. You can cross off one, cross off the others until you have one left. And Mercury, in the third house, conjunct the IC, the third house is concerned with the consideration of all the possibilities other than the one you've made a personal attachment to in the second house. In the second house, you make a personal attachment this is my value, this is the jersey I'm going to buy, not that one or that one, this is the statement I'm going to make to you about something. From me, it will undoubtedly be altered. In fact, the judgment that you have to make is that it will be altered. This is just for the moment. This is second house stuff. It's not permanent. All this first quadrant is just by the way until I've considered everything that comes in the third. So there's a dialogue that goes on between the second and the third house all the time. And in the third house you need to bring in everything. Doesn't matter. You're not wedded to it. We were talking about getting outside the 9 dots yesterday, which is a sort of framework that one is accustomed to working with, and you have to get outside that. And in the third house you bring in everything and consider it. And then dialogue goes on between the second and the third house, which gives you all the evidence to decide, now what will I put in place to continue this thought, this project, this life in the fourth. Because the fourth house, think always of the chart, it all belongs to me. The fourth house belongs to me. Yes, there is an inner pattern of being, fourth house with which I was brought up, which gives me a basis for operating or not operating, as the case may be. But sometime along the way, I've got to alter that. I can't carry on using that particular rule for making pottery, writing books, continuing my life. I have to bring in the evidence of my own experience, started at the ascendant. And so all that first quadrant is evidence gathering, and in this chart, an enormous amount takes place in the second, because you can imagine a conversation with this person. Here is a third house Mercury in square to Saturn. What do you think you can say to him? Well, he can say his point of view in the second house and immediately know that it's changed. So that when he comes to share it in the third, well, I can't share it yet because I'm still thinking about it, because so to say it is to alter it. And that is what happens in this particular chart. But his sun, the very life force, is down in the fourth. And in the fourth house, to have a life force, for it to move through the life and through the space of one's life, it must be enlivened. It must have in place, day by day, rules which will enable it to function. And so which of all these multiplicity of ideas, thoughts that come in the second house, Mars, Uranus, Jupiter, I say Saturn is thought. Saturn is really structured thought. I'm not saying that thoughts don't come in other ways. There are Uranian thoughts as well. But because here is an instant idea. But when you actually come to make them real and tangible in this world, you have to refer to Saturn. Now, so here's a lot of time spent putting into place those rules by which he will proceed with his life, his books, or whatever it is that he is involved in. And I will tell you that he is a writer, a well-known writer. And once that is in place, once those rules are in place, then his life force can work. And they can't work until they're in place. And one of the great stresses and demands of his life was finding the time to listen to others. He was a university professor as well of medieval languages. There's lots of clues in here, and there's perhaps a hug to the first person who comes up with his identity. Now, in the fifth house, in this particular chart, the real value, what becomes apparently of value from all the preceding, after he's put the rules in place, after he's done all his previous thinking, is Venus in the fifth. Because Venus enables you to evaluate the evidence, the people, the substance of what is there, to decide, yes, this I will integrate into my life, that is, love it. This I will not. Venus always involves a choice. This is why it's associated with Libra. Why, I might ask any of you at the moment, does Libra involve the necessity of choice? What has gone on before you get to Libra, after you've started at Aries, that demands a choice? You're faced with sharing it. So who do you share it? All the subconscious development of what you might call the world psyche is described by the zodiac. And the subconscious development of the individual is described by the cycle of the houses through from the first to the sixth. So that in the seventh one has to share what one has, and in Libra one has to share what one has. But with whom? With every Tom, Dick or Harry, junkie, whatever? People who don't like Mozart or can't stand quiche or whatever? No. One has to involve choice, and that takes time. Once you get outside the personal world, where you can make your own choices arbitrarily and have to consider the integrating or sharing what you have with others, that takes time to see, well, does this person actually like what I'm giving? That takes time. You have to give it and see. And then later, you've got to give it time also to see whether you value what the other person has to give. That's why Libra takes so much time. You know, ask a simple question of every other side and you get a simple answer. Ask a simple question of a Libra and you get a complicated answer. I might say I've got Sun, Mercury in Libra. Lots of complications. But, so in the fifth house, the fifth house demands that you take a risk. If you put rules into place in the fourth house, as in this, and the life force is dependent on it, sets off, it's enlivened by the rules for procedure in whatever entity that this person puts into place in the fourth, can he go straight from there to making a fully finished article or book or whatever in the sixth? Well, in truth, with this one he can, because Mars, Jupiter trine across those second to sixth houses. He dives in and does it. But the outcome is different if he ignores the implications of the fifth house. If you try to make a fully finished article, you leave out the element of experimentation, of risk-taking, of seeing what happens when you try this or try that, without worrying what's going to happen to it. So it's demanded in the fifth that you take risks. Love affairs. If having sifted through all one's companions and decided that in the fourth house there are worthwhile companions who you really like having around you and you feel a little bereft if they're not around, so you have number fourth house companions, then from those one chooses the companions with whom one will take risks. Play games without worrying about who's going to win or lose. The love affair is that phase of a relationship when one is prepared to take a risk without worrying about forever after. Without saying, no, I'm not going to come to bed with you unless you marry me and put it on the dotted line and thing. One must now, and when I say a love affair, I don't specifically mean sex, although it may involve that, but it involves putting oneself at risk and not worrying about the outcome. And with Venus in the fifth, it is essential, and what happens for him, that the actual attachment to the things which are of value become apparent as a consequence of taking risks. Now there's a Venus-Uranus square, you may notice there, so that the fifth becomes involved very early on in the piece. As soon as he's sorted out at the beginning what it is that he's actually going to do, there is an immediate contact with the fifth, so that and you will have noticed with Uranus that it acts instantaneously. But when you dissect a Uranian action or thought, it becomes a logical process. It's just the speed. It's like word process, microprocessors which used to grind through, when there were vowels, a computer would take hours or whatever to grind through all the information. Now here is a 100 megahertz microprocessor which zaps through it in a microsecond. This is what happens with Uranus. But if you slow it down, you can actually see what happens in that. So that here is an instantaneous understanding of the variability or alternatives of things of value. What do you find in charts where Venus and Uranus are in contact? You find variable relationships, freedom in relationships. What does freedom in relationships mean? It simply means a recognition of the individual value of that which is seen, and the immediate incorporation of that into one's world or personal view. And it has its value. Now that may conflict with the established authority and practice. Saturn in Libra on the ascendant would describe this as a function in the life which bedevils everything else in all sorts of ways, because here is a life which has to accommodate immense variability of understanding within a framework. If I could say to this person, tell me about who was the authority figure in your childhood, mother or father. Now I would also say that this person, as a baby, was taken, you might see the birthplace up there, Bloemfontein, was taken by a household servant, black servant, to a kraal and to the tribe, and taken to the witch doctors, presented to and shown to the witch doctors, who were very impressed. Another clue, you haven't got, no one's got, anyone got any idea? Fun? No. Writer, professor? I'm not saying, but he's white. He's white. And thought of as English? No. Anyway, that's a digression, whatever. So here we have different processes at work. There are immediate essential functions. Now, I want you to look also at the consequences of Scorpio after Libra. In Libra you can take and must take all the time you need to see what the relative values are so that an integration can take place. But when you get into Scorpio, stop messing about. There is a change of form, a change of understanding, a necessity to either commit or expel that's demanded when you get into Scorpio. Things either change and evolve and a commitment takes place, or you say, I don't like that, I'm moving on. And a change of understanding takes place automatically in Scorpio. So there is an urgency about the effect of Scorpio at the second house, which demands that there shall be some practical outcome. And the Mars there. And that can work. Here is the Mars trine to Jupiter in Pisces in the 6th. The Moon is also in Pisces in the 6th. So here is a responsiveness to the necessities of the moment. If we look at the fact that one is sharing things in Libra and the 7th house, the previous sign and house must be the last stage of individual preparation before one is ready to share. So ipso facto in the 6th and Virgo, whatever is there is ready. Now, you know how with the Virgo nature, the common complaint is, I'm not ready. Do you love me? I don't know. I haven't given up thought. And you can understand how the life force of a sun in Virgo does not feel itself ready, because there's always preparatory work to be done. And yet, Libra calls, the earth is turning all the time. When Virgo rises, Libra is not far behind. And the necessity comes to share, so that in any given moment, I mean, here was I this morning, in some sort of odd, I've got Saturn, Uranus conjunction squaring the Sun at the moment, so that was a little demonstration of that variability at work. But I had been giving quite a lot of thought to all this, but not sure of its exact form. But nonetheless, here it is, I'm here, you're there, I've got to share. I'm not ready, but I've got to share. So I open my mouth and out it comes, you see, in whatever way. But, so that here is an immense practicality always at work, intuitively at work in the subconscious. So preparation is going on for whatever is necessary all the time between the Mars in Scorpio in the second and the sixth house. But there is something underneath that going on. The Uranus-Venus square is going on beneath that and in concert with it all the time. So that here is risk-taking and an argumentative nature to what is of value. Here is the essential Uranus at work. Now, this is all, I might say, by way of a long digression towards getting through to Pluto up here in the 8th, because there is another injection of life force here when we get into the 7th, when the sharing takes place, because here is Mars ruler, Aries on the cusp of the 7th. So here's a new injection. It's an injection of energy because it is an angle. There's an injection of energy at the ascendant to start things off. One gets pretty weary after going through all that analysis of information by the end of the third. So there's a new injection of energy at the lower meridian and that angle, and then one gets pretty weary by the time that one is finished the preparation. So there's a new injection of energy at the 7th house cusp at the moment of sharing, because you cannot share without getting something back. It's implicit. And so and it's doubly renewed, because in the moment of sharing it, here is more stimulation coming back from the 7th house response to whatever is shared. And then in the 8th, the sensory reality becomes apparent. So that the fundamental changes which take place in the 8th, I was talking with someone last night about, you Marilyn, wasn't it? We were looking at, talking about 7th and 8th. Now I know that traditionally the 7th is considered to be the house of marriage. And the reason is that the marriage was a contract. You put it was on the dotted line, and then as a consequence of that contract, an integration took place. But there are contractual marriages in all sorts of things, from personal affairs to businesses still. But if I bring two ropes together, and I use the analogy of rope, of two three-stranded ropes whipped on the end so that they're tightly controlled and aren't going to unravel, and I bring them together and I say, I declare thee man and wife. And then I get one person to pull on one rope and one person to pull on the other rope, like that. It's not a marriage. It's a contract. A contract can be just torn up, like that. For a marriage to take place, you have to take the whipping off the ends of the ropes, unravel the strands, marry them together, tuck one strand over the other. Then they are married, and when you put a strain on them, not only do they resist being pulled apart, but they can never go back into their previous form. Now that is the consequence of what happens in Libra and the 7th house. It's why you need to take time. It's That's why you need to take time to become aware in the seventh of the value of what you are sharing, and take it for granted that what you are sharing is of value. You need to take time to become aware of the value of what is being given to you. And if the person who is sharing with you values what you have to give. And if you do that, there are two automatic things that take place, which you need never worry about. You will either like what is being shared and find that what you have to offer is being valued, in which case there is an automatic letting go of the control of the self. It takes place automatically. One is no longer fearful of oneself and the self relaxes because of being valued, because of being loved. Love is an action of valuing. The person spends time, their life, integrating money into their life. They consider that's what they value, so that's what they love. There's a lot of chastening insights to be had into our natures when we look at things this way. And if that happens, if value is seen and shared, then there is an automatic relaxing of the strands of the self, and they become married. So that any close friend with whom you've had a long-standing interaction and who you don't have to worry about, you are married to in the terms of that relationship, which is unique of itself. Now, if you make a formal contractual marriage in an old-fashioned way, and your partner says, no, that's the form, forsaking all others, take thee only unto, and there is in place in your life 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 married friendships in which you are, by the integration of value, you are married, for that to be torn up strikes at the very heart of the self. But that is what goes on in the 8th house. In the 8th house there is that automatic marrying of those things of mutual value. Now you see at this stage the importance of being truthful at the 2nd house stage. If you are asked, do you like Mozart or anything, any particular statement, and you lie at that stage, all the responses that take place, everything else that takes place from there is falsified. And you get through to the 8th, and some kind of marriage takes place, if you are blind to things, and at that stage, the real 2nd house values are activated again. No, I don't like Mozart, I can't stand Mozart. If you play any another Jupiter Symphony, I shall scream, you know. I mean, this is what Bill Shakespeare was saying in Hamlet Act 2, Scene 4. I quote dear Bill every most time because he's very, very useful. When Polonius was saying goodbye to Hamlet's friend, he said, "And this above all to thine own self be true, and it follows as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man." And it's at that 2nd house. So you can understand the problems for this person with Mars Uranus, who will tell the truth in the 2nd house, but then it will be false because he will have altered his mind. And he has to say, I've altered mine, that I have these values and these values and this and this and this. Now, when we come here, right at the end, and here the last planets, no, Saturn is, I consider it can be conjunct the ascendant here. But it is also in the 12th house, dominates the 12th house, so, and you have to remember that at the end of a cycle, the end of a thought, you've got to consider what is of value from that process that I need to carry through into the first, to a new beginning. What is not relevant do I need to let go of? So that quadrant from the 10th to the 12th, to the first, in that last quadrant, is all a letting go process. And Saturn in the 12th month shows the difficulty of letting go all the time. Now, when the thought gets through to Pluto, this Pluto-Neptune conjunction, something fundamental happens to it. Commitments have been made along the line, quite important commitments and firm ones with the Taurus on the cusp of the 8th, and then they are all put at naught by Neptune-Pluto, which undermines and changes it all. At that stage in the thought, all that has gone before has to be let go in order that the implications of the whole exercise can become apparent. There is that strong contact of the Pluto-Neptune with the 12th house Saturn. Now, shall I show you who this is? Anyone got any idea? J.R. Tolkien, the writer of The Lord of the Rings, professor of Middle English, a man with an extraordinary variety and imagination, but who lived a relatively, well, he led a very structured, conventional life as a professor. Now, that's 11 p.m. approximately, and I rectified that. The information comes from a biography of him by Humphrey somebody, in which there's enough evidence to see that it is a Pisces ascendant, and then a slight rectification. Sorry, a Libran ascendant, that's right, sorry. Sun Pisces, yeah. Forgive me that. So we'll put him away for a moment. Now, are there any thoughts about this? Because I've been rattling on before we change. Pardon? Oh, yes, yes. Well, I told you it was partial. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Oh, yes, indeed. Yes, because what was of value to him came out from what he had put in place himself in the fourth. It's an outcome. Every house, everything that happens in a house is an outcome of what has happened before, in the previous house, It's all dependent. Now, of course, there are emphases in houses, and the life force gets involves itself most naturally in a particular area. But if it hasn't paid attention to all that has gone before, it all goes for naught. If he was simply to involve himself in Scorpio, Venus, Uranus, Scorpio, Aquarius, first, fifth house affairs in terms of the conventions of decadent society, he'd never have got round to writing. Now, who's got something to say about this? Have a little look at it for a moment. Gemini rising, Aquarius on the meridian, Pluto in the 3rd, South Node in the 2nd, in Cancer. Neptune, Venus in the 5th. You notice there's an extraordinarily distorted Warsaw, 52 degrees north. November the... Nearly devoured, sure it was. It was November 1935, I'll tell you then. Sun in Scorpio. Sextile Moon in Look at, yes. Has anyone got any thoughts? How... Now, where is the life force here and how is it involved? Yeah. Sixth house, Scorpio, Sun. Sorry? Yes. Yeah, but it's... I wouldn't consider it to be predominant. But, so what is the mode of beginning? Here's choices of a different kind to the Libran ones, isn't it? Everything, the necessity for everything to be considered as a basis of beginning. And the ascendant ruler in a square to Pluto. Well, they are, and I mean, you've mentioned about Hobson's choice, didn't you? Here we have Pluto in the third, in a square to Mercury. So what happens at this stage? The necessity of looking at all choices is made virtually impossible, because a commitment is imposed upon the person in the third house that makes any consideration of alternatives at that stage quite irrelevant. Pluto has the biquintile with Saturn, the square to Uranus, trine to Jupiter, square to Mercury. I'm particularly looking at the fourth and fifth houses here. Say in this chart, someone who is begins with a receptiveness to everything, is immediately drawn into and involved with their past and their collective past, because Cancer is the collective past, and the South Node in Cancer shows a fundamental involvement and dependence upon that collective past. One has to recognize... who went to Helen's talk on nodes? Did she clarify exactly what the nodes are and what... Yeah. The intersection of the plane of the moon's orbits with the plane of the ecliptic. What is the plane of the ecliptic? It is the symbolic representation of all universal life. What is the plane of the moon's orbit? The life of the personal private self, the developed self that one is responsive to in one's own immediate environment. And there is a connection between those two. There's a connection between one's own private development, one's own history built up for oneself through one's responses to everyday life, which is the lunar cycle, and the connection between that and the input into it and into the channel, both outwards from what one has and inwards from the universal life, are the nodes of the point of interconnectedness of those two planes. And it's a two-way thing, because although it is said that the south node says where one is coming from, resources already there to be drawn on. And so, I mean, I have a this birth was a month after mine, a close friend of mine, and so that immediately his own choices, the ways of making his own value judgment at that second house stage of saying, yes, this is important to me, are immediately compromised. They're compromised by everything that has gone before. He can really only say, okay, well, I can look at my own history, I can look at my own Cancer, second house, south node, and the third house, Pluto. And yet the life force is, comes alive. Now, the other, when one looks at the fourth house, the necessity of putting rules into place for oneself in the fourth house, and remembering, if you put a rule into place for yourself to say, okay, I will try it this way and see what happens, at what stage does it become apparent to you what the consequences are? Huh? No, in the 10th. In the 10th, it's all out there. This is how what I have done is accepted out there in the real world, and how I become because consciousness only comes at that stage. There's all sorts of stuff to be gone through before you get to there. And if you want to find out if something is going to work, you say, okay, this is an experiment. I will try it this way, see what happens, share it, listen to people I share it with, and then I will know whether it works or not. And there is nothing. Now, I have done quite a lot of yacht racing. I found that, and I know I've got Jupiter rising in Scorpio, I can be quite competitive. But I found that when I was feeling competitive and being competitive, I didn't sail well. I had to come to a stage of understanding that if I treated every race as if it was a preparation, a practice for another race, even if it was the Olympic trials, then I sailed well. Still didn't beat Russell Coutts, I remember, but still. So that this is a useful philosophical function for each of us and for our clients, to treat each thing that we're doing as if it's a preparation for something else, because it enables us to take risks. Now, the risks that we take in the fifth house enables something of the real self to come through. If you use established rules, things you've learnt from a book, to make pottery, and here's a picture in a book of a particular bowl, and you copy that slavishly in a sixth house form and share it, what is it you're giving? Are you giving something of the self? Or are you giving something that someone else has designed and which you've just copied? The interception of the fifth house is essential if it's to be something truly of the self, and if the creative spirit is to be alive. So that you must incorporate into the learning cycle, that fifth house you have to incorporate. I mean, every house has to be incorporated into the learning cycle, whether there's a planet in it or not. That is an essential framework. Yes, life and energy is emphasized in particular areas, but this is what consciousness and the transits of other planets, the moon goes through every sign and house every month, enlivening that house. The sun goes through it, giving it life every year. So taking risks in the fifth house is essential if you are actually going to share something of yourself. And this will tell you something about challenges of a fifth house Saturn. So now, talking of which, if you look to the function of Saturn, of where one's responsibility to oneself lies, yes, in one's infancy, it represents the controlling authority parent. There comes a stage, at least at the Saturn return, when you'll say, yes, that may still be my father, my grandmother, or my boss, or whatever, but it is my Saturn, my responsibility to myself. I am my controller. Where does my responsibility to myself lie? Saturn, it says, demands that you play. It is one's responsibility to learn how to play. And who do you learn to play from? One's children. So the responsibility of Saturn, if it is to learn to play, and children are the people who... Now, there comes the trick of putting aside the parental Saturn, who didn't like playing, didn't think that playing was a productive thing, and one of the implications. But so the life force of someone's Saturn in the fifth is dependent upon playing. I mean, the life force is dependent upon playing for everyone, but it's made particularly difficult with the Saturn. Now, but look in the fifth here. What do we have? Neptune, Venus in Virgo in a trine to the moon, which is... Yes, it is. This is Placidus. It doesn't matter. You've got the meridian axis is, because of it, the northern latitude. Yeah. So this is the way it actually... And so it fits. But it's also at the nadir. Does anyone know the difference between the IC and the nadir? That would be forced by equal house. It's the nadir and the zenith are the points in square to the ascendant axis, descendant axis. And you'll find, particularly in American books, that they are often written of as being, the IC is often written of as being the nadir, but it's not. So that point in square, so this is very close to that Neptune Venus is very close to the nadir. Now this is the most subconscious part of the chart, isn't it? It's difficult to make your own rules because the imposed rules of one's parents and society are implanted in infancy when the moon is simply being receptive to that, going round every month, triggering off every response. I mean, every few minutes there's moons going over this midpoint, that midpoint, aspecting this, triggering off our responses to the stimulus which is going on all the time. That is what builds up the past. That's why the moon refers to the past in one's nurturing, because that is what it's triggering off. It is, of course, reflecting light to us all the time. Very useful to look at the moon, at full moon, and say, what is it? It's a chunk of rock reflecting the light of the sun. It's bathed in sunlight. And so here we have moon. Here are the inner rules that the person puts in place for themselves, because this is nadir. I mean, if you simply use only for, equal house or only Placidian, then you come up with part of the answer. You've got to look at other aspects. You've got to look at the fact that here are planets in square to the ascendant, at the nadir. That point at which anything is at its furthest point from the ascendant-descendant axis, the darkest, deepest part of the psyche, the most inaccessible part of the self. So here are rules put in place by our experiences of childhood, which have to be made conscious so that we can alter them for ourselves. Now here is a moon, a Venus-Neptune. Now we all know about Neptune and illusion and Neptune and inspiration, but what is the primary... When does inspiration occur and how does it occur? Does it occur before the act? Can it... in my view, it only occurs during the act. Inspiration comes as a consequence of action. It may be an active thought. I mean, it doesn't have to be as physical as whatever. But it doesn't come when what is thought of as inspiration before the act is in fact illusion. And in this particular case, one would see an illusory, perfect entity, Venus-Neptune entity, as something which is lost. Now, St. Brendan, who I mentioned plenty to students and clients, was an Irish monk of the 10th century who made a voyage in a leather boat from the west coast of Ireland to a land part of the west. And when he was asked why he was going, he said, "We cast ourselves afloat upon the waters in order to see the wonders of the Lord writ large on the face of the earth." He was giving up any expectation, any illusion at all, to be receptive to that which is there. And that is the necessity of Neptune. To give up expectation that there will be a perfect partner or a perfect something. To be aware of the perfection of what is in front of you. The universal value of what is there in each entity. Venus-Neptune people are said to be indiscriminate in the people that they associate with. And they are indiscriminate in the best sense because they are receptive to their value. They may or may not early on see that. So the necessity of Neptune is to be receptive to the value of what is there. So the most important person in one's life is the person that one is with at any given moment. Now, you can look at a little scenario, for example, of this particular person with Venus-Neptune right down there at the bottom of the chart. And this is in the 5th, so his whole life force depends upon that, because Leo on the cusp of the 4th, Neptune, Venus in the 5th, Sun in the 6th. Here is life force involvement in all that, in effect, making really effective that part of the development cycle. Because the first part is cut off from him completely by all the things I've previously said. Now, you see this person with a conventional marriage partner or jealous companion. And you see them at a table with half a dozen other people, and when they are, and they might be talking in conversation with each one in turn, and their attention to each person will be complete. They will be loving that person because they will be receptive to the value of what that person has, and then they move to the next person. And their companion, their fraught Saturnian companion, will be saying, "I saw you. You can't be just content with flirting with one person. You were flirting with everyone at that table." But it's essential to give value to everyone that one is with. And it's the point of, and it is at Neptune that you have to put aside all expectation or illusion that this person or that person does not have anything of value. Oh, they ripped me off once, or they stole my girlfriend, or they did this or that, whatever, as a subconscious thing. Put all that aside and be receptive to them as they are now. Now, this, of course, puts one in conflict with Venus-Saturn. Now, every chart has Venus-Saturn. There is a Venus-Saturn relationship in every chart. You look to it, you say, what is it in this chart? It's Saturn in the 10th. It doesn't actually have an aspect, but it is... it's not quite a full moon. It's a second quarter moon phase of Venus to Saturn. So that the Venus-Saturn putting into place of permanent things of permanent value to self is always coming to fruition and needs to be regarded as always coming to fruition by giving time to that, by taking time to put that Venus-Saturn into play. and by the recognition of that. Now, these things which are only come by consciousness. This is the whole purpose of being an astrologer and having a chart, to make oneself conscious of those things which normally in the subconscious. Now, here is a person who, born in Warsaw in the Polish ghetto. How are we going for time, by the way? We're nearly there. Okay, well, I told you it was going to be an itsy-bitsy sort of thing. Born in Warsaw in the Polish ghetto in 1935, at the age of 6, in the invasion of Warsaw, his mother put him on a train to Switzerland, told him that she would see him in a few weeks' time, and he never saw her again. She was eliminated in the pogrom there. He always had a desire to write music and to write a... he wrote a lot of music, and he wanted to compose an opera of based on King Lear. Here was his Nadir, Neptune, Venus. Now, how he earned his money was as a concert pianist. And he was an amazing concert pianist. Every time he played something in his repertoire, he drew from his subconscious, and it became altered. I never heard him play anything which came out the same way twice. Now, of course, this is true for most people or consciously, but some people try to replicate it. He, to be involved in it, and this was his Venus, Neptune, Moon. And the Moon, Mars in Capricorn brought it out in terms of form. The main determinants of music are Venus and Saturn, and Libra and Capricorn, because it's harmony and form, which are dependent on the other. But he was also driven to put these things, this is why he had to write music. And of course the King Lear theme, I think, describes very well the dilemmas involved with the losses involved with the Pluto in the third, the losses of any kind of real childhood rules of environment, with the Venus Neptune on down at the bottom there. And so he was all his life he was searching to put in place an environment or rules which would function for him. He didn't think himself very much of a pianist at all. This is what I do for money, to give me enough time to... He wrote me in January one year and said, from the hospital bed in Germany, and said, I've got cancer of the bowel, tell me how long I've got to live, because if it's only 6 months I can afford to sell my house and devote all the time to finishing off the opera of King Lear, but if it's more than that, I'll have to make other arrangements. Well, what I did was tell him what the necessities of the moment were. I looked at the transits, and I didn't tell him when he was going to die. I said, these are the necessities of the moment. These are the things to consider. And he, in fact, died in June of that year, bowel cancer. Now, you can understand that he had conflicts with himself and conflicts with his sexuality, and he was, in fact, bisexual. But what he produced, and here's his 10th house Saturn, the rule, what he produced from his subconscious and his life force was amazing. It was real. It was tangible. It was Saturnian. It could be admired, and it's permanent. Now, I'll just finish off by saying that he donated his skull to the Royal Shakespeare Company, saying that he had always wanted to be on the stage, and and they accepted it. And a very good friend of mine, Elaine Beadle, and I are determined one day to get ourselves to the Royal Shakespeare Company to a performance of Hamlet. And when the skull comes on, we'll say, "Alas for Andre, we knew him well." Anyone else got anything to say about this before we conclude? I mean, there is the necessity of the death of everything which has gone before, isn't there? In order that the life force can actually get to work in the subconscious and utilize itself. When I put this whole thing together and was thinking about it, I was actually thinking of a two-period thing in depth that we could look at different things, but when it came down to being a short time, I had to sort of redo it. So I hope there's something that's useful in that. Well, there is always a concentration of energy and development in those areas, but it doesn't mean to say that the rest can be ignored, even though that they tend to be ignored. I mean, as far as he was concerned, once he'd played something, it was finished. The Saturn and the 10th, it's gone, and I would commend this to everyone. When you've done something, give it away. Just give it away and get on with the next. Don't interfere with what other people do with what you give them. Just let them deal with it as that is the necessity of the last quadrant. But there's topics for different lecture in that one. Okay.